Hello and welcome to the big picture. The results of the elections in Pakistan have belied predictions of a hung parliament and have given Nawaz Sharif's Pakistan Muslim League almost a clear majority. It is being hailed as the victory for democracy in Pakistan and also an evidence of the people there wanting a stable government. However, many issues have cropped up from these results. One of them being how fractured the verdict is in terms of its provincial nature, thereby raising fears of it affecting the federal structure. On the other hand, as we discussed here on this channel last week, Sharif is considered the best man for improving the Indo-Pak relations. With him now at the helm and not having to fall back on any other major party for support, will he be able to fulfill all that he had promised during the campaign? Especially those concerning the improvement of relations with India. Also, how he would deal with the relations with the United States and with the army will also be watched closely. We will discuss all this today with an experienced panel of guests. I have with me Leela, Ponappa, retired diplomat and former Deputy National Security Advisor, Vinod Sharma, political editor, Hindustan Times and close Pakistan watcher, retired Commodore Uday Bhaskar will be joining us soon, and Upadhyay, consultant at the Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis. Welcome to all of you. Let me go to Leela Ponappa first. Leela Ponappa, you think that this result in Pakistan is something which will continue to keep a stable democratic government in Pakistan?
Well, first off, I think we really should congratulate the Pakistan people for turning out in the numbers that they did in order to exercise their mandate at a difficult time. Will it result in stability? I think it's a little too soon to tell, but certainly the results show that there is a groundswell of support for Nawaz Sharif and his party. That Imran Khan, despite the numbers that are very much less than the PMLN, has made a start. You know, they've opened their account in a manner of speaking, in a manner that they had not done earlier. And I think the writing on the wall is there for the PPP to see. Now, there are many imponderables going forward, largely in terms of the state of the Pakistan economy, in terms of the relationship between the different institutions of the Pakistan state, particularly between the executive and the government and the army. But I think certainly Nawaz Sharif comes in as a third-time prime minister. Perhaps he's learnt a lot, perhaps he's somewhat chastened because twice he's had to encounter the army. And presumably there would be an attempt to try to ensure some kind of stability.
Okay. Vinod, you think third term he's getting into the mistakes which he has committed in the past, you think he will be able to overcome them? The hopes which have been, which Leela Ponappa talks about.
I hope that he's third time lucky. And he has the numbers. He has the will, more importantly. Mind you that he fixed 4 army chiefs, the 4th Musharraf, who's now in jail and he's in power. But the first was Asif Nawaz Janjua, Jahangir Karamat.
You're giving Nawaz Sharif the credit for fixing Musharraf?
You see, but he did, because mind you that, he came back together with Benazir Bhutto and others under the National Reconciliation Order. And he has shown his strength today. He is the Prime Minister and Mr. Musharraf is in house arrest. So in retrospect, he has proved his authority as a Democrat. And I think that he will carry that good work forward and be able to convince or, force the Pakistan Army to remain within the confines of the Constitution. Now, the question is that his problem is that his mandate is essentially Punjab-centric. He has full majority in the assembly there.
Right.
And on the strength of his popularity in Punjab, which sends the largest number of MNAs to the National Assembly with a directly elected strength of 272, of that he is stifled short. But if you add the indirectly elected,
yes,
so he'll have a huge majority in the House. So he will be able to formulate policy, pursue policy. But in the provinces, unlike the PPP in its prime, which was a pan-Pakistan party, the PMLN remains a Punjab-centric party, and that is where he may have problems in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa if he does not allow.
No, Vinod, that is the question. Next question I wanted to ask you. I want all of you to react to it. First, you can briefly react to this. This result, some people are expressing, because it's so much provincially based that, does it affect the federal system in Pakistan?
You see, there has always been this grouse the smaller provinces have had against the Punjab, especially Sindh, that they are the imperial power in Punjab, in Pakistan, and they can get anything done that they want. And this issue came up majorly when Nawaz Sharif won the case against the state of Pakistan after having been dismissed by Ghulam Shah Khan in the 90s. And one of the judges who came from Sindh said that there can't be two sets of laws for the prime ministers from Sindh and the Punjab, because Benazir was similarly dismissed but never restored. So he will have to come to grips, and he will have to reconcile these contradictions which are there in the Federation of Pakistan. But his most contradiction, according to me, Girish, will be to resolve the contradictions of having taken the support of certain elements whom he has to contain in order to pursue good relations with India.
We'll come to that a little later. Mr. Upadhyay, there's a headline today in one of the newspapers saying that democracy wins, federation loses.
Well, how so much I may like to applaud Pakistani democracy in a triumph of the democracy, I can't escape the impression and the feeling that this election was fought under the shadow of the guns.
Yes.
Not the protective guns of the army, but the terrorist guns of certain Islamic radicals who had come out very openly to threaten some political parties and indirectly, tacitly support some of the political parties, including the Nawaz Sharif. And the army, which was supposed to have come and protected all the political parties in the entire electoral process, I think did nothing. The irony of this high-risk irony comes that President Zardari, he himself could not go to his constituency to cast his vote. He sent his vote through ballot, postal ballot. Now that is a commentary on. Incidentally, I may quote you, the Dawn newspaper carried an opinion poll today, in which about 6,000 people in Pakistan have voted all across, and 55%, more than 55% voters have said that they did not feel it very easy or convenient to go and vote. So that itself is a commentary. I mean, these are the things which you simply can't brush aside. As Mr. Sharma mentioned, that the biggest problem is how he's going to deal with his allies in these elections, the Islamic radicals. Now that is the problem.
That is an issue which we'll discuss. I want to bring in Commodore Uday Bhaskar here. Uday, there have been a lot of problems in the election. Ultimately, as Mr. Upadhyay was pointing out, it was under the shadow of the gun. We saw a lot of violence also, even on the polling day there was violence. But is it something all is well that ends well, or we are going to see some more problems of what some people say has been the creation of Nawaz Sharif himself in his previous avatars?
No, I think there is no doubt that as far as the backdrop to the election is concerned, the way in which the Taliban tried to intimidate the voter, and the fact that we had more than 100 people killed in the run-up to the election, more deaths on Saturday on the day of the election, all of this I think is something which is part of the backdrop to the election. But notwithstanding, if more than 60% of the Pakistani electorate has actually voted, I would say that the true winner of this election is the Pakistani voter.
Right.
Yes, Mr. Nawaz Sharif is leading the PMLN, the largest party, but I am slightly doubtful about his ability to deliver on issues that are critical to India, and particularly in relation to terrorism and the way in which the Pakistani military has invested in terror groups as part of a long-term strategy that's more than 20 years old. And in this particular election, I think Mr. Nawaz Sharif has made a Faustian bargain by taking the support of the right wing and suggesting that he could arrive at an accommodation with the Taliban. It's going to be payback time now. So this is the dilemma On one hand, to deal with the internal security, he has to task the army to crack down on the Pakistan Taliban.
Right.
This is a group with which he seems to have made a political understanding. And the army in turn will have to be encouraged to take very firm steps when he's constantly talking about civilian primacy. So I see this as a little tension which is going to be quite problematic for him in the first few months when he assumes office as Prime Minister for the third time.
Okay.
Girish?
We have Mubasher Bukhari, a senior journalist from Pakistan, on the phone line with us. Mubasher, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Mubasher, there are a lot of mixed feelings here in India about this victory. Some people feel that it is a victory for democracy. As you were also there on this program on Friday, many of my guests here felt that Nawaz Sharif is the best bet for India, and now we see Nawaz Sharif coming to power almost on his own. But there are doubts being expressed about his ability to fulfill some of the promises which he has made, especially when it comes to the Indo-Pak relations.
It's my personal feeling. I met Nawaz Sharif today as he invited foreign media, and since I'm working for an international wire, and we discussed the same issues with him, and he was very much confident about his thoughts about relations with India. So he has will inside, and he has a complete and strong will for establishing very friendly relationship with India, and I think he will make all-out effort, no doubt about it.
Okay. Leela, Ponappa, do you share that optimism and confidence of our Pakistani friend? Or do you think that as Commodore Uday, Bhaskar and Upadhyay feels that that he may not be able to fulfill some of his promises because, as Commodore Uday Bhaskar says, he has struck a Faustian bargain?
Well, I don't think either of the two observations is necessarily contradictory. In fact, I would like to revert to some of your earlier comments, namely that has Nawaz Sharif learnt from his earlier mistakes in terms of the relationship with the army? And Vinod Sharma's points about the contradictions within Pakistan, say vis-a-vis the federal structure and so on. These are the realities of Pakistan, and I think really the issue for India is, will Pakistan get the kind of leadership that works for Pakistan? Because if in fact it does, then I think an essential part of it is stable relations with neighbors, and I do believe the India relationship is one of the most important for Pakistan. Now, Nawaz Sharif is a businessman. Businessmen tend to be practical. He has made statements. India was not really an issue during this election.
Absolutely.
And he has demonstrated a certain willingness to address issues head-on. Whether he'll be able to deliver or not, as we know from our own experience, there are always many imponderables when any government goes forward, particularly one which has a mandate but not a clear majority. And I think we'll have to see how things evolve. I think this was true in Nawaz Sharif's earlier incumbency, and equally so now, because Pakistan has huge challenges and contradictions.
Okay.
There is the security situation, Uday's point about the relationship with the Taliban, the economic challenges, the relationship with the US, with the IMF, and so on. So we'll have to take it step by step. The man hasn't yet been sworn in, but I think we should be hopeful, but also be realistic in our expectations.
Okay. On that note, I think we need to go into a short break. We'll come back and continue the discussion. There are many other issues involved, and we will discuss that. Please keep watching back very soon. Welcome back. We are discussing the Pakistan election results and asking the question if Nawaz Sharif is the best bet for India and will it improve the Indo-Pak relations. Vinod, what is it that India will be looking for to prove to itself or to convince itself that here is a man who will do best for us? He, during his campaign, if you remember, he made two things. He said two things which many observers here in India are very skeptical about. One is that he will share the report of the Kargil and as well as the Mumbai attack with India.
You see, I tell you one thing. You see, Nawaz Sharif, I've often said, he is twice qualified to rule Pakistan. He is a Punjabi who is an ethnic Kashmiri. And in that limited sense, he is comparable with our hardliners in India. Mr. Vajpayee was the best person to broker peace with Pakistan, and that too to start with Mr. Musharraf. They were a perfect combination because both didn't have to live down the myth of being pro-India, and Vajpayee didn't have to live down the myth of being pro-Pakistan. Unlike in the case of Benazir,
Right.
who during 2 tenures as Prime Minister was persistently living down the myth of being pro-India. I think Mr. Nawaz Sharif's first agenda will be to deliver on the domestic front,
Right.
which is the sagging economy, the unemployment rate, the high inflation, and most importantly, the energy crisis which Pakistan faces. If he
I
is
think-
able to deliver,
Right. Leela Ponappa made this point.
No, if he's able to deliver
need
on
a
this-
prime minister who is good for
no,
Pakistan.
they are interlinked.
Yes.
You see, his relationship with India is interlinked with his performance on the domestic front.
Absolutely.
Why? For the simple reason that he once told me, I asked him, he says, look, Vinod, we are not threatened by the growth of the Indian economy. It's not a threat to us. We perceive it as an opportunity. He says, if I can attract foreign investment in my country to shore up my manufacturing sector by flaunting the market next door. Now, here is this kind of a pragmatic approach which he has. Now, he has to
He's a
he has to
businessman.
ensure peace with India in order to repair the Pakistan economy.
Absolutely.
He knows it 100% well, and he's a pragmatist. As Leela pointed out, he is an absolute pragmatist, and he is a practical person who can run rings around the army on the day that he's in good nick. May I tell you this? And he has done so. He is on record having said that he won't take dictation from the establishment in a national broadcast. And that man hasn't vanished. He may have mellowed, but he is not mellowed in the sense that he knows it how to do it better now.
Let me get Mubasher on this. Mubasher,
Yeah.
two things here. One, that Nawaz Sharif knows how to handle the army. Two, second thing, more important for you people in Pakistan, is this a defeat to the secular forces in Pakistan, his victory?
Personally, it's my opinion, my personal opinion that secular forces have been cornered in Pakistan, number one. Number two, as Vinod was saying, that now Nawaz is more experienced person and he can handle military establishment well now. And historic reference of his intention and practical is when Pakistan and India launched Dosti bus service in 1998 and Mr. Vajpayee came to Pakistan, I saw protests everywhere in the country by religious forces, and I witnessed some anger of military establishment people. Despite that, Nawaz went ahead and accomplished the job. So this time, he would handle a military establishment very well. But again, he will have to get support from at least secular forces which have been cornered in these elections, like Pakistan People's Party and Awami National Party and MQM.
Okay. Mr. Upadhyay, would you like to, will he be able to bring together all these forces?
It's a very difficult task, frankly speaking, because of the commitments and adjustments which have been made before the elections. How he is going to come out of that? How he is going to turn against the Taliban, his supporters, and other people and Islamic regime? We have to remember that Mr. Nawaz Sharif, in his first prime ministership, tried to move certain Islamization measures which fell through. In the second prime ministership in 1998, he got a 15th constitutional amendment passed by the National Assembly, which called for introduction of Shariat laws in Pakistan, system of zakat, whatnot, and all those things. And that measure fell because he did not have majority in the Senate. If he had that, he would have taken that through. He would have done something which even Ziaullah could not do. So in this way, we have to see how he's going to move on to this thing. He has got tremendous challenges. He has tied himself with certain commitments and obligations. How is going to come out of that? How is going to be a statesman like this thing, and of course take Pakistan on an entirely different course? These are the things which you have to wait and watch. But our experience with Mr. Nawaz Sharif in the past is something which adds an element of caution on our part. 1993 Mumbai blasts were done by ISI when he was Prime Minister. He appointed Lieutenant General Nasser as chief of the ISI, who had a committed pan-Islamic agenda. In fact, under his leadership, it was that the proliferation of nuclear technology started from Pakistan. It was during his ISI stewardship that Pakistan lifted a substantial amount of armament to Bosnia, where it complicated the whole situation. The problem in China's Xinjiang with the Uyghur militants was also triggered by ISI during that period of time when Mr. Nawaz Sharif was there. 1999, he was receiving Mr. Bajpayee in February. He did not know about Kargil at that time, probably. But there are Pakistani experts who say that in March 1999, he had been told everything. He had a couple of generals in his entourage who had questioned the Pakistan army officers about that plan, and they had told Nawaz Sharif that they are doing something.
Yes.
These are the things which you have to wait and watch.
Uday Bhaskar, there are warning signals, as Upadhyay is saying, is that the past has some lessons for us. But I would like to go to another issue. How do you think the relations with United States will improve, or and that triangular relation between India and US and Pakistan and India, how will it emerge under Nawaz Sharif?
Well, I think first of all, he would have to reset his relationship with the United States in the light of the kind of campaign assertions that he had made.
Right.
Now, clearly, he had stoked the anti-US sentiment.
Right.
Because that is something that goes down very well with the right wing and the Pakistan-Taliban constituency in Pakistan, particularly in Punjab and in the NWFP. To that extent, there was a sense that whether it was a drone attack or that Pakistan does not need US aid, he had taken some very extreme positions. But once he sits in the chair as Prime Minister, I think the fact that Pakistan is down to the equivalent of 8 weeks of foreign exchange calls for a very immediate rearrangement of the loan repayment schedules,
right,
which means the IMF or the World Bank. Now, their support will not be forthcoming unless there is the equivalent of political support from the United States. So, as I see it, while the US needs Pakistan till 2014 to ensure an orderly withdrawal of their troops from Afghanistan, both sides would have to, I think, rearrange the contour of the bilateral relationship. And that in turn would have a bearing, I think, for the India-Pakistan as also for the India-US, because we have to look at a post-2014 when Mr. Nawaz Sharif is going to be dealing with a Pakistan where there's a new army chief,
right,
a new chief justice, a new president, and no Western troops or US troops in Afghanistan, and the Taliban perhaps becoming more emboldened to further the agenda that they had identified even before the election.
Okay.
So that's the way I would interpret the bilateral relationship.
Okay. Leela, Ponappa, is that the way you would also interpret, or do you think, being a businessman, Nawaz Sharif will be able to understand the importance of the relations with the United States and keep it going?
I think I talked about realistic expectations, and I really must say that I entirely agree with what Mr. Upadhyay said. If one were to sum it up, it is that we have to look at the totality of Nawaz Sharif. Where did he come from? Who has he been dealing with, not just in this campaign, but even in his earlier political activity? What is the reality with regard to the state of the Pakistan economy? Uday just talked about his having to reset his attitudes towards the United States. And we've all seen situations where during a campaign a person says one thing and reality hits once they assume office and have to deliver. So we need to observe Mr. Nawaz Sharif with a degree of caution. Because there is enough in his record to say that he can deliver positively, but whether he will, whether he has the political clout, starting with the army, starting with the right-wing elements, with each of which he has had dubious equations in the past. I think we can see a tremendous spike in the role of Saudi Arabia in what happens in Pakistan for obvious reasons, because Saudi Arabia provided Nawaz Sharif shelter during his years in exile. And that has implications with regard to his dealings with many of the right-wing groups.
Yes.
So can he deliver? Certainly. Will he deliver? It remains to be seen.
Okay, Vinod, very quickly.
In relative terms, the Pakistan People's Party, which did not have the kind of relationship which is being described as dubious, perhaps it is, I think that unless you have the ability to engage with these elements, you cannot neutralize them. Now the question is whether or not he can neutralize these elements. These elements have to be neutralized also in the context of the Pakistani politics and democracy, because Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan reject the very idea of democracy as a Western concept. And I think that Nawaz Sharif has to neutralize that thinking amongst the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. He has equations with groups holed up, which were sectarian groups, holed up in the south of the Punjab, Lashkar-e-Jangvi and Anjuman-e-Sipahi Sahiba. And I think he's best suited to deal with them and talk them out of the situation.
No, but what
I
about...
think that his test will be whether he can keep his government, he can keep the army where it should belong, and at the same time neutralize these elements into accepting. You see, no prime minister in the run-up to elections has made the kind of statements which Mr. Nawaz Sharif has made with regard to the terror attack in Mumbai, with regard to Kargil, and with regard to his equations with the army.
Mubasher,
nobody in the history of Pakistan has ever done that.
Mubasher, you think those were very bold statements? Very quickly, do you think those were very bold statements which he will find difficult to fulfill?
Yeah, they were bold statements, but rest assured, if he carries out an inquiry into Mumbai attacks or Kargil things, that thing would never be public in Pakistan at least.
Okay.
So I don't know about sharing anything with India, number one. Number two, coming back to a previous point, yes, Nawaz Sharif would establish very good relationship with USA because Saudi Arab would be a mediator between America and Pakistan under Nawaz rule. And secondly, he would be able to handle these extremism and extremist elements in Pakistan better than anybody else because of Saudi influence on some of the groups and his own connection with some of these militant groups.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're completely run out of time, Mr. Upadhyay. I would have loved to come back to you, but we're completely run out of time. On that hopeful note from Pakistan, as our friend in Pakistan says, that Nawaz Sharif is the best person suited to handle all these diverse problems which are within Pakistan and between India and Pakistan. We'll hope and we'll watch closely how he will be able to deal with these issues as he goes along. Thanks to all my guests, Leela, Ponappa, Commodore Uday, Bhaskar, Mubasher, Bukhari, Mr. Upadhyay and Vinod Sharma. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on The Big Picture, same time tomorrow.